Welcome and thanks for joining me on Talk the Walk. I'm Sarah Wong. Almost 1 year ago, Beijing introduced a national security law for Hong Kong, sparking fears that the SAR's autonomy and freedoms were being eroded. Authorities insist that its sweeping legislation is crucial to stamping out any separatist movements and to safeguarding social stability. But it pushed opposition leaders and activists to the knife edge, who may face arrest in the future for crossing a red line in the past. Western democracies have also decried that the law's implementation has dismantled Hong Kong's rule of law. With so much at stake, we sit down with Security Secretary John Lee, who is at the forefront in promoting the legislation. Thank you very much for being with us, Secretary.
Thank you for your time.
Now, we'd like to start with the June 4th commemoration this year. Authorities said this year's June 4th candlelight vigil could not go ahead because of public health concerns. Now, should the pandemic subside, say, next year, will the people in Hong Kong be able to commemorate the Tiananmen crackdown or even call for the end of one-party rule? Will they be allowed to do that?
Well, I think after the COVID pandemic is controlled, then there will be demonstrations. But demonstrations will take a form which will be in compliance with the law and also will not be a threat to national security. There are two cases in courts recently regarding taking part in unauthorized assembly, and the judgment is very clear that participation in an unauthorized assembly is an offense, whether or not it involves violence. So, yes, people can exercise their rights to demonstrate, but they have to do it within the confine of the law. They cannot break the law. The second thing is, with the promulgation of the Hong Kong National Security Law, no activities should cause harm to national security. So if any activity that endanger national security, then it is unlawful. So in that context, demonstration will happen. They will happen within the confine of the law and also cannot endanger national security.
I guess the concerns is a lot of people are worrying how the government's going to draw the line between legitimate calls for democracy and, legitimate or substantial efforts in subverting state authorities. How do you define that?
Well, it is the duty, of course, the government to explain more about the actual content of the Hong Kong National Security Law. There are 4 types of offences very clearly defined in the National Security Law. I make use of all opportunity to explain to people what the law is all about. I do seminars, I do presentations, I do webinars, but it is important that people do pay attention to the content of the law. The other thing is, normal people should have no worry whatsoever that they will be doing anything to endanger national security, because the law is very clearly defined. And it is only people who tries to have ulterior motive that they may contravene the law. So it is important that we always have a law-abiding sense, that we don't always challenge the bottom line. And that should be the attitude of the city as a whole, because both under the basic law and under the national security law, there are clear provisions to say that people should abide by the law. People should not try to challenge the law each and every time. That's a dangerous thing to do.
Okay, Mr. Lee, I want to go back to the issue of protests. So it's been more than a year since we last saw violent street demonstrations like the ones we've seen in 2019. And the government and you also have credited the disappearance of violent protests much to the national security law, and in part weeding out the foreign interventions and foreign powers. we've seen the arrest of more than 100 people in Hong Kong for alleged violation of the national security law. But do you have evidence to back up the claim that the national security law has successfully weeded out the foreign powers that you've always said?
Well, I think it has stopped two things. First of all, it has stopped foreign money coming into Hong Kong to cause trouble against our national security.
Do you have evidence of that?
Let me finish first. And the second thing is, shortly before and shortly after the promulgation of the national security law, we actually see people leaving Hong Kong all of a sudden. And there are indications some of them actually are intelligence-related people. These people are experienced. They are state-level players who have a lot of abilities, and maybe they may have been doing this for quite a long time. So they have stopped doing a lot of things that they did while the 2019 disturbances still go on. These things have stopped. And that is why I think most of the blatant, unprecedented violence and organizations have subsided. And I do not think the Hong Kong people do not have that sense of observation. I think I will be insulting their wisdom that they will not be able to observe even this such big difference in what they go through now compared to what they experienced since 2019.
When you talked about state-level players, can I clarify if you're talking about foreign governments?
Well, I think state-level players means state-level players, right? Of course, there may be people related to government. There may be people who are related to organizations which are sub-body of government. And I think we don't really need to go into that elaboration to find an academic definition. I think people have common sense to understand what I'm talking about.
Now, speaking on foreign forces in Hong Kong, we know that many figures on the government's watch list, on the government's radar, have left Hong Kong, some of them charged under a national security law. Now, is it fair to say that the government's hands are tied in the situation in bringing them back to Hong Kong?
Well, these fugitives, they have to pay their price twice. First of all, they try to escape Hong Kong justice by fleeing, so they will be lifetime fugitives. That's the first price they pay. It's not the harm they will be facing, the trouble they will be facing, be a lifetime fugitive. Their family members are affected. That's the first price. The second price they will pay is when we arrest them, then they will still face the charges that they have tried to evade, and possibly additional charges such as not complying with the court order or attempt to pervert the course of justice. So they will have to pay their price twice.
Is there a mechanism?
And we will pursue them, no matter where they go. And they have to understand the political situation around the world can change very quickly. When they still are of some use, then, well, there may be something that they can count on. But when the political relationship has changed, they may become useless, and then they may be abandoned. There are all sorts of difficult circumstances and opportunities, I think, that we will eventually see, and I'm sure that we will pursue them for life until we get hold of them so that they will face justice in Hong Kong.
Is there a mechanism in the works for the government to make those arrests right now?
There are many mechanisms. Well, you have mentioned surrender fugitives. There's only one. There are a lot of international cooperation. And as I have said, there will be phenomenons that people may not see nowadays when the international relationship is like this. But when things change, then it can be a very different profile.
Okay.
Mr. Lee, Hong Kong is a very international city, so it's been welcoming in foreign talents and foreign businesses for decades. But in a recent interview by the outgoing Consul General of Canada, Mr. Jeff Nankerville, he said that the implementation or the promulgation of the national security law has imposed what he called a chilling effect on the work of his consulate in the months after the implementation of the law. Do you see this as a misconception or a misunderstanding?
Well, his statement is very inappropriate and irresponsible. Canada has Canada's national security law. Hong Kong has our Hong Kong national security law, which covers only 4 types of offences, which is a small number when you really talk about national security threats and offences. So, is there a chilling effect in Canada when Canada has its national security law? One very important fact which people with ulterior motive always try to mislead people. We take action against act is what you do. It's not what you believe. It's not what your political background is. So when people make statements about action being taken against certain type of people, the type is irrelevant. It is the act which is relevant. So if you are not contemplating anything to endanger the national security in Hong Kong, then there's nothing you have to worry about. So it's a very misguided statement. Particularly, is very double standard.
He was actually saying it the other way around. It was that when the consulate officials tried to approach some like Hong Kong organizations, they feel that the organizations were trying to distance themselves away from like foreign consulates because of the possible fears that they may step into the boundaries of the national security law. So is this to do with public education?
Well, we should explain the law as much as we can so that people understand it. But it is not appropriate for somebody who has his national security law and attack other people's national security law when both actually serve the same purpose.
We'll take a short break here, but we'll continue to discuss the national security law with Security Secretary John Lee when we get back. Don't go away.